Good morning. I am Molly Brinkerhoff, today's worship associate. Welcome to this cold January morning. It is a good day to be together, if not in person, at least virtually, and hope is on the horizon. This service is brought to you by Reverend Kevin Carson, Daniel Schwinn, and myself from the church's sanctuary. Again, welcome, whether you are a longtime attendee to the church or this is your first time. Our weekly announcements are, first, if you are able to sign in on the chat box to the right of your screen, this will let us know who is joining us. And we will be having joys, sorrows, and concerns today, and if you didn't mail them into the worship team, now is the time to put them in the chat box so the candle can be lit for you. Please indicate if it is a sorrow, concern, or a joy. It has been noted that new people have been joining us for our live Sunday service. If you are new and would like to get our email newsletter, please call the church admin office and leave a message with your email address. If you would like to talk to someone about the church, please again contact our office. We are so glad you are joining us. While we no longer have an offertory time during the service, it is still important nonetheless. So we would gratefully receive any donations to support us. Just go to our website to click on the Give button. Thank you for your support. I have a very important message to the members of our congregation. The UUCIF annual meeting is coming Sunday, January 24th, starting at 11:30 in lieu of our social hour. Our annual meeting is where we acknowledge the work of the past year, vote on board and some committee memberships, and vote on the annual budget. It is important that every UUCIF member make every effort to join in. Our online gathering still has to meet the required number of participants, or quorum, for the results to be valid. So just click on the link that was sent in your email last night. And now we have a note from Reverend Kevin.
Before we begin our regular worship service, I wanted to say a few words about what is happening in America right now. After the horrific events in Washington this week, some of my colleagues decided to scrap their worship service they had planned this morning and instead focus on the challenges that our nation faces. I thought about this and decided to stay the course with my original topic of green spirituality among the Abrahamic faiths. For one reason, there are plenty of news and discussions about this and on social media, and this current crisis dominates TV every day. And it's good to take a break and think about something more pleasant for our own mental health. My other reason is I did not want to let the thugs that invaded our capital derail any more of my life or yours than they already had. Next week, as part of our service honoring Dr. King, I'm sure that some of these recent events will find their way into the sermon, and I think this is entirely appropriate. But for today, let us find some solace in our time together.
We will now move into our sacred time of worship. To breathe in is to take in air, oxygen into our lungs, and expel it. Inhale and exhale. To breathe is to pause and move air gently. Breath allows us to rest and recover. When we deprive our breath by holding it, we tire and lose energy. To breathe freely provides relief from anxiety, tension, and pressure. So breathe easily. Inhale and exhale as I ring the peace bowl 3 times. Let go of the anxiety, tension, and pressure. We will begin our service with our prelude. Our church covenant was decided upon by a group of members from this congregation. Our covenant, along with our 7 Unitarian Universalist principles, is our guide to how our congregation will relate to each other and in the world. Even though we cannot be together physically, I believe it is still important that we read our covenant together. So as I read our church covenant for us all here at the church, please recite it from home with me. Love is the spirit of this community, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. We will now be lighting our chalice, and if you have a candle or chalice available, please light yours with us. In keeping with today's sermon theme, today's chalice lighting is from the Old Testament. According to the Bible, God said in Isaiah 55:12, "For you shall go out in joy and be led forth in peace. The mountains and the hills before you shall break forth into singing, and all the trees of the field shall clap their hands." And in Psalms 96:11-12, he said, "Let the heavens be glad, and let the earth rejoice. Let the sea roar, and all that fills it. Let the field exult, and everything in it. Then shall all the trees of the forest sing for joy." Let me put forth that the God of the Old Testament valued nature, and that we should too. So we light our Unitarian Universalist chalice for nature today.
Our call to worship this morning is a Jewish prayer for the creation. How wonderful, O Lord, are the works of your hands. The heavens declare your glory. The arch of the sky displays your handiwork. In your love, you have given us the power to behold the beauty of your world in all its splendor. The sun and the stars, the valleys and the hills, the rivers and the lakes, all disclose your presence. The roaring breakers of the sea tell of your awesome might. The beasts of the field and the birds of the air proclaim your wondrous will. In your goodness, you have made us able to hear the music of the world. The voices of loved ones reveal to us that you are in our midst. A divine song sings through all creation. I invite you now to join in our opening hymn, number 207, "Earth Was Given as a Garden."
Today's Time for All Ages Is It Tu B'Shavat Yet? By Chris Barash, pictures by Alessandro Pacharopoulou. Is it Tu B'Shavat yet? When we look out the windows at trees dressed in browns and smile to imagine their leafy green gowns, Tu B'Shavat is on its way. When our cousins in Israel send pictures of bees as they buzz around blooms on the pink almond trees, Tu B'Shavat is on its way. When Gran hurries in from her trip to the store with dates, pomegranates, and olives galore, Tu B'Shavat is on its way. When Dad helps us make trees so crunchy and sweet from all kinds of nuts, fruits, and seeds that we'll eat, Tu B'Shavat is on its way. When we work at the park and help spread the news that we need to recycle, reduce, and reuse, Tu B'Shavat is on its way. When Mom's back from the nursery with seedlings in tow and says we'll soon plant them and help them to grow, Tu B'Shavat is on its way. When our spades dig deep hollows as friends gather round, and everyone helps place our trees in the ground, when we reach out our hands as we happily say, "Thank you, trees, for all that you give us each day," Tu B'Shavat is here. Tu B'Shavat is a Jewish holiday celebrating the earth and the trees. The end.
For years, the sharing of joys, concerns, and sorrows has been our enduring ritual. It is a time in our congregation where each of us has an opportunity to share major events in our lives so we can all be uplifted by this Unitarian Universalist community. As I read the joys, concerns, or sorrows that were sent to us and put into the chat box, Reverend Kevin will light a candle. So the first one I have is from Layla Chambers, and hers is kindness and compassion for all of us, especially those who experienced the siege in the Capitol. Victoria McDonald has a joy is that she watched pre-recorded Metropolitan Opera live streams that are available every evening. And from Karen Shropshire, from all gathered here this morning, of course, our great concern and sadness over the events of our nation's Capitol building this past week. And that is all I have, and we do light an additional candle for all those joys, concerns, and sorrows we hold in our hearts and are unable to share today. Stay healthy and strong, members and friends. Our UU community lifts up its love for each and every one of you.
I have two readings this morning, one from the book of Job from the Hebrew Scriptures, and one from the Quran. If you aren't familiar with the book of Job, it is considered part of the wisdom tradition of Jewish thought. Scholars believe the text dates to between the 7th and 4th century BCE, although the story may be much older, perhaps as much as 3,000 years. It is a poetic text that explores the question of theodicy, why God would permit evil to exist in the world. In the story, Job is a righteous man, and Satan comes along and tells God that his righteousness is only because of the blessings God has bestowed on him, that he would renounce God if he took everything away. Job suffers miserably as a test and remains faithful in the end. But in his despair, he berates God for the injustice he is suffering and the injustice that is clearly present in the world. God responds from within a whirlwind and generally makes a lengthy argument that God's ways are beyond human comprehension. The passage I'm about to read comes from one of God's monologues in his defense. Can you hunt the prey for the lion, or satisfy the appetite of the young lions when they crouch in their dens or lie in wait in their covert? Who provides for the raven its prey when its young ones cry to God and wonder about for lack of food? Do you know when the mountain goats give birth? Do you observe the calving of the deer? Can you number the months that they fulfill? And do you know the time when they give birth, when they crouch to give birth to their offspring and are delivered of their young? Their young ones become strong. They grow up in the open. They go forth and do not return to them. Is it by your wisdom that the hawk soars and spreads its wings toward the south? Is it at your command that the eagle mounts up and makes its nest on high? It lives on the rock and makes its home in the fastness of the rocky crag. From there it spies its prey. Its eyes see it from far away. And from the Quran, Surah 6, verse 99, and it is he who sends down rain from the sky, and we produce thereby the growth of all things. We produce it from greenery, from which we produce grains arranged in layers. And from the palm trees of its emerging fruit are clusters hanging low. And we produce gardens of grapevines and olives and pomegranates, similar yet varied. Look at each of its fruit when it yields and at its ripening. Indeed, in that are signs for a people who believe. Even if you were not raised in a Jewish or Christian home, most people are aware that the Bible begins with a creation story in the book of Genesis. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good. The story proceeds from there, describing the creation of the universe, humankind, and all the plants and animals. And after each new addition to creation, there is the refrain, "And God saw that it was good." In fact, at the end of the sixth day, having completed the work of creation, it is said that God saw everything that he had made, and indeed, it was very good. And for Muslims, The story is very similar, with a few differences. Although the verses that speak about the creation are not told as a single story, but scattered among the 114 surahs in the Quran. For example, in Surah 15, verse 26, it says, "We created man from sounding clay, from mud molded into shape." For all three Abrahamic faiths, the heavens, the earth, and all the creatures who dwelled therein were imagined to be part of a beautiful and good original creation. The best of all possible worlds, as Leibniz would argue in the 18th century. In the Judeo-Christian story, humankind was imagined to be the pinnacle of creation made in God's image. And as such, we were given dominion over the earth and all its creatures. Thus, every plant, animal, and mineral could be used for the benefit of human needs, and history has proven that we have been all too eager to exploit these resources with reckless abandon. A similar perspective exists in Islam. However, there is a subtle difference because of the fundamental Islamic concept of tawhid, or the oneness of God. It is most commonly expressed when Muslims recite the Shahada, saying, "There is no God but God." When this concept is extended, the implication is that there is God and other, and nothing else exists outside of these two ontological categories. As the Islamic scholar Sayyid Qutb described it, there is divinity and servanthood, the former pertaining to God in exclusivity, and the latter characterizing everything and everyone other than Him. This duality of God and creation means that there is a unity of humankind with the rest of creation. And this has important implications for the ecological ethics of Islam. The characterization of the human role as servanthood is also important. According to the Quran, after the rest of the creation refused the offer of the amana, or trust of Allah, humans accepted and became the managers of the earth. The Quran describes this role as that of Khalifa, or vice-regent, over creation. And this is an important distinction from having dominion. A vice-regency implies that something is being held in trust by a guardian, with the understanding that one day the rightful owner will return to assume ownership and control. In the Islamic view, we have a right to use the earth's resources temporarily, so long as we are not wasteful or needlessly destructive. But we are not free to exploit creation with impunity, since the real owner of everything is the divine creator. In fact, we are charged to manage it justly and improve it. In recent times, the idea of stewardship has become popular among Jewish and Christian environmentalists as a way to reinterpret dominion. And while this is probably a generous interpretation of the original language in the scripture, stewardship of the earth is closer to the Islamic idea of our role as Khalifa. Though creation began as good, nothing gold can stay. And the Abrahamic faiths explain the introduction to evil in the world as a result of humanity's sinful disobedience and subsequent expulsion from the paradise of Eden. We would still benefit from the earth's plants and animals, but now we would have to struggle and toil for our survival. The forces of nature would often work against us, bringing storms, floods, droughts, and other disasters. But even so, ancient authors described the wonder and beauty they beheld in creation. There are around 500 verses in the Quran that refer to the earth. And in the Jewish scriptures, which stretch back nearly 3,000 years, there are numerous passages that extol the beauty and power of nature, including over 1,000 references to plants alone. This is especially true in the Psalms and in the wisdom literature, for example, in the passage I read from the book of Job. Nature has always inspired spiritual feelings and thoughts about the divine in the human imagination. And for theistic believers, nature revealed the glory of God, whether we thought of humankind as part of nature or something set apart from it. It is worth noting, though, that this positive attitude about nature was generally limited to what was useful to mankind, while wilderness as we know it and creatures without utilitarian value were scorned or at least disregarded. Wilderness in both the Old and New Testament is typically viewed negatively as a place of trials and tribulations, even if it provides a means to spiritual transformation. For example, the author of Deuteronomy describes a great and terrible wilderness, an arid wasteland with poisonous snakes and scorpions. In contrast, Eden was a garden, and more agricultural-friendly areas are described as a land of milk and honey. As Roderick Nash points out in his classic work, Wilderness and the American Mind, the ramifications of this ancient utilitarian attitude have colored the Western perspective on nature for over 2,000 years and continues to influence environmental policy today. By the time Jesus began preaching about a more just society and the imminent kingdom of heaven, little had changed in technology for thousands of years, and most rural people continued to live intimately with the land. It is not surprising that the parables and other teachings of Jesus are filled with natural imagery that would resonate easily with his audience. Behold the birds of the heaven. Consider the lilies of the field. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, and so on. Jesus had no need to promote an earth-honoring spirituality per se, because the experience of nature was an everyday fact of life. It is also important to remember that the Jesus movement was an effort to reform Judaism, so from the beginning, Christianity has enjoyed all the rich natural inspiration from the Hebrew Scriptures as well. As Judaism, Christianity, and Islam developed over the centuries, each tradition established an extensive collection of writings, in addition to their primary sacred texts, that expressed their moral and theological thinking. And some of the material addresses the human and divine relationship with the natural world and the moral implications of how we interact with nature. The Talmud and commentaries in the Jewish tradition are one example. In Islam, there is the Hadith literature that claims to chronicle the life of the Prophet Muhammad, providing examples of behaviors for Muslims to imitate, including practical discussions about what we would call environmental issues. The Islamic legal system, Sharia, began as a set of rules governing water usage. And in fact, the word Sharia in Arabic originally referred to the place from which one descends to water. Other Islamic laws were concerned with regulating land use, denoting four principal categories of land: developed land, amir; undeveloped or wild land, mawat; protective zones, hamir; and reserved land, hima. This last category, hima, is really a special designation of undeveloped land that is set aside for the public good. Originally, a hima might have served such uses as an undeveloped common pasture or permanent buffer zone. And in contemporary Islamic countries, hima lands are frequently designated as preserves or parks. The Hamir protected zones are commonly set aside to provide a buffer zone for wells and other sensitive areas that have been enacted in similar ways in the United States over 13 centuries later. Considering the desert ecosystem, it is easy to appreciate why water and land use would be important issues in places like the Arabian Peninsula. In Christianity, the influence of Greek and Roman philosophy, particularly Neoplatonism, meant that early Christian thinkers like Augustine of Hippo often speculated about the relationship between the material world, humanity, and the divine. Of particular importance is the question of whether the natural world is good or evil, or if it belongs in some other moral category. The human condition and the natural world were seen through the lens of contemptus mundi, contempt for the secular world. But even so, there continued to be writing about the beauty of creation. Salvation and spiritual growth became the central concern of Christian theology. But our interconnectedness with the rest of creation and appreciation for the beauty that surrounds us continued to inspire Christian theologians and mystics through the centuries. Medieval mystics such as Hildegard of Bingen and Francis of Assisi are noteworthy for their artistic and theological contributions to Christian environmentalism. Hildegard was a prolific author, composer, and theologian, in addition to being a physician, naturalist, linguist, and founder of abbeys for her Benedictine order. Her poetry and musical lyrics are rich with nature images that celebrate the verdant world. Francis of Assisi has become one of the most venerated figures in Christian history, and it is a rare depiction of Francis in Western art that does not include at least one animal or bird. He has been honored as the patron saint of ecology in the Roman Catholic Church, and like Hildegard, his writings are filled with nature imagery. Praise be, my Lord, for our sister, the earth, which sustains us and keeps us, and yields diverse fruits and flowers of many colors and grass. The animal legends associated with Francis rival the Buddhist Jataka tales, and this may not be a coincidence. Many scholars believe that the Jataka tales were translated into many languages, and in their popularity they became infused into the stories of Christian saints during the Middle Ages. In the years after the Protestant Reformation, the number of sects within Christianity expanded at an enormous rate for reasons both profound and trivial. The most important contribution from this period to environmental ethics was the development of the scientific method as Christian thinkers search for the revelation of God's truth in nature. Though the church and science have often been in conflict, as famously seen in the trial of Galileo, our knowledge of climate change and other environmental issues owes a debt to the theological universities that arose during this period. Liberal theology likewise owes a debt to these schools that incubated the advancement of rationalism in religion that continued to the Enlightenment and to the present day. This lineage includes the nature spirituality that emerged from liberal Christianity among the transcendentalists, which is so important to our Unitarian Universalist faith. The modern environmental movement began in earnest in the middle of the 20th century, and by the 1960s, religious people of all faiths were starting to develop ecological movements within their traditions that were meant to respond to the issues that were becoming painfully clear. For others, the ecological crisis precipitated a spiritual crisis, and it became more appealing to simply walk away from traditional religious affiliations and embrace a more earth-centered spirituality. One of the seminal moments in the story was the 1967 publication of Lynn White Jr.'s essay, The Historical Roots of Our Ecological Crisis. This essay has become so well known among scholars that it is sometimes referred to as simply the Lynn White thesis. In his essay, White challenged Christians with a thesis that Western civilization is essentially Christian in context, and it follows that our anthropocentric perspective that the earth was provided exclusively for human benefit is the major factor in the environmental degradation we see today. He pulled no punches with comments such as, Christianity is the most anthropocentric religion the world has ever seen, and we shall continue to have a worsening ecologic crisis until we reject the Christian axiom that nature has no reason to existence save to serve man. Not surprisingly, reaction for and against this essay was swift and sometimes vitriolic. And perhaps the most balanced treatment of what he calls the ecological complaint against Christianity, theologian James Nash argues that while much of White's criticism was accurate, and Christianity has many ecological sins to confess, the idea that Christianity is the root cause is too simplistic. He writes, "It tends to reduce the explanation of the complex ecological crisis to a single cause, to exaggerate the authority of Christianity in cultures, to minimize the fact that non-Christian cultures also have been environmental despoilers, to overlook the number of dissenting opinions in Christian history, and to underestimate the potential for ecological reform in Christianity." I think Nash makes some good points. And over the half century since White's essay was published, there have been many advances in green Christian spirituality, including the important environmental encyclical titled Laudato Si on Care for Our Common Home, published by Pope Francis in 2015. In that document, for the first time, the leader of the world's 1.2 billion Catholics addressed a host of environmental and related social justice issues without apology, including the existential crises of climate change and loss of biodiversity, calling on science and religion to work together to find solutions and the will to enact them. Judaism has many green groups these days as well, and the ancient Jewish concept of tikkun olam, to repair the world, is frequently cited by Jewish environmentalists as the foundation of their work. There's a strong sense that the traditional Jewish emphasis on social justice must be extended to include care for the planet and for all life. Among the roughly 2 billion Muslims around the world, there are also many environmental movements springing forth. And this is especially the case outside of the traditional Arab world in places like Indonesia. Like many others in the developing world, they are often more intimately aware of the impact of human activities and centuries of poor environmental practices and resource management. Drawing on the responsibility for creation demanded by their faith, a number of significant faith-based efforts have emerged, often led by Muslim women. These are just a few examples of green spirituality from the Abrahamic faiths, and of course we could explore many others if we had time. Though the prophets and sages of these ancient traditions did not speak directly about environmental issues, or could even imagine the problems we face today, I hope I've made the case that there are sources of green spirituality in all three traditions that are worthy of further exploration. For those within each tradition, it is clearly possible to maintain very traditional beliefs and still find inspiration in nature to engage in the work of environmental justice. And whether we believe in a theistic God or not, we should at least be able to find common ground to begin to heal the damage we have inflicted on our common home. Though I do not belong to any of these three faiths at this point in my life, my approach to green spirituality has always been one of all of the above. I believe in seeking spiritual inspiration in the entire cumulative tradition of the human journey. And I believe that strong interfaith partnerships with green movements within any denomination or religion are essential to confronting the ecological crises we now face. My love of all life finds wisdom in words like those from the medieval Christian mystic Meister Eckhart, who said, "Every creature is a word of God." I invite you to join in our closing hymn, number 163, For the Earth Forever Turning. Our closing words are from Hildegard of Bingen. I am the one whose praise echoes on high. I adorn all the earth. I am the breeze that nurtures all things green. I encourage blossoms to flourish with ripening fruits. I am led by the Spirit to feed the purest streams. I am the rain coming from the dew that causes the grasses to laugh with the joy of life. I am the yearning for the good.
We will now extinguish our chalice with the following words. Please join me. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Please join us for our social hour within a few minutes after the service is over. Thank you.